Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and if you hear shouts of joy and celebrations coming from Austin, that's because the Texas Legislature has adjourned Sine Die, and legislators are returning to their own communities. And hopefully, advocates and staff are taking some time to rest, reflect, and recuperate. And we'll give you some time to rest, enjoy some fresh air, touch some grass, and maybe reflect on what happened over the last 140 days in Austin. But soon, it'll be time to get back to work, to plan our advocacy over the interim, to have some conversations with legislators, and maybe consider some accountability for the areas that did not go well. We'll talk more about what happened in a wrap-up series coming soon, but for today, we welcome Texas Impact's outside legislative counsel, Beaman Floyd, to give us a high-level overview of what happened during the session with some thoughts on what comes next. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Beaman. Joining us for this week's conversation is Texas Impact's outside legislative counsel, Beaman Floyd. Beaman, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Scott, good to see you.
We are now out of the actual legislative session. Sine Die's in the rearview mirror, but apparently the Women's College World Series and the Men's College World Series are both on our minds. Feeling good about watching baseball these days instead of the legislature?
Indeed, yes.
My Longhorns are still alive on the women's side. I won't say anything nice about your LSU Tigers, but I don't know. I guess good luck. I can't get there.
Thank you.
So Beaman, before we jump into the legislative session piece of this, I just want to say I had so much fun with you and the Texas Impact lobby team meeting every Friday. It was a different dynamic on the Texas Impact staff this year. We had a great group of lobbyists working on behalf of Texas Impact. Do you want to say anything about that collaborative work that you and that team were able to do this legislative session?
Yeah, I do. I will tell you that we had what I consider to be a very A-grade lobby team this year. We had people of varying levels of experience that came in, and people with various concentrations and jobs in the lobby space. And I really felt like the coordination that we did throughout the legislative session, both in the Capitol and in our weekly meetings, helped the team to cover each other, to overlap, helped our vertical alignment with our communications and our both external and internal with our lobby efforts in the Capitol. I think in the past there had been a little bit of siloing there where people scratched their heads and said, we know something is going on in the Capitol, but we're not sure what. And that's okay. That's actually pretty normal in a lobby space. But if you really want to advance an organization's agency in the lobbying world, good integrated communications and good overlapping teamwork are really important. And man, your guys really executed, including you, Scott. Very much appreciate it. And Davey, who's here, man in the booth, and all of our people who are pounding ground in the Capitol. I really enjoyed the work. It's very fun to be in a healthy collaboration like that. So much appreciated.
Yeah, it was a great process, and I want to thank you for your leadership. You have a little more experience than the rest of us in the space. I think that's fair to say.
That's because I'm old, but yes.
Your words, not mine. Your words, not
Yes.
mine. I'll stick with experience. But all of our advocates did incredible work throughout the session, and one of the reasons they were able to do that is because of the lobby team that was in the Capitol doing the work on the ground and communicating out to the advocates what needed to be communicated. And so I'm grateful for you, grateful for that team, and looking forward to the next steps as we move forward into the interim. But before we get there, I want to take a look back on what happened over the course of the 140-day legislative session. We're going to spend the next year and a half talking about the accomplishments and lack thereof of this legislature. Before we get into specifics, we're going to do a series coming up talking about all of the bills that we covered and all of that kind of stuff. But in terms of narratives, what stood out to you as key narratives over the course of the legislative session?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really read this session as very political, and in many ways more political than policy. There was a very direct correlation between the political campaigns that brought the personalities to the Capitol and then what was happening in the Capitol. There was plenty of policy work too, always. And if you do a Venn diagram of politics and policy, there should be and often is a big overlap. So it's not that politics in the Capitol is bad. Politics sort of transmutes into policy in the Capitol. But there was a lot more sort of electoral energy, I guess I would call it, in the Capitol in this particular legislative session. And it was, I will say that in some of the policy areas, it was pretty tough, where we were trying to argue policy points with data, and sometimes we would be told, well, there's a bill that has to pass. And you say, well, tell me why it has to pass. Well, it just does. Okay. That's a pretty soft policy statement there. And yet we did see a lot of initiatives in the Capitol that seemed to be that way, that they were sort of characterized as must pass without very strong policy or data underpinnings. And that sort of is a pointer to the work that we need to do going forward in the interim of really trying to recenter a legislature, particularly one that doesn't have a lot of man and women hours of experience, on that sort of deeper policy dive and away from the some of the politics of the day that really aren't supported by real data.
And I know I've heard you say many, many times, probably on this podcast, that your favorite part of the job is sitting around the table and figuring out how to get to good public policy. Right. And I think that's something that all Texans should aspire to, having serious people in the building who are grappling over complex public policy issues and trying to find a path forward. Is the new reality this political takeover of the process, or is there a way to turn that tide?
No, I think you've got to turn it. And I think that I think it is a dual responsibility of education. I think one of the things that legislators need to embrace or re-embrace is that the job in representative democracy is to go and represent the voters, right? They vote for you. They don't own you. And then you go and you take your beliefs and your understanding and your intellect to the Capitol and represent them in the Capitol. But they also, the legislators, have a responsibility to educate themselves and then educate their electorate, right? So it is important that legislators go back to the district and say, in even some cases, I said I was going to do this thing and I found out it's more complicated than that. And that's hard, right? That's advanced democracy right there. But it is what is necessary to get the best results in public policy. If a member goes to the Capitol and finds out that things are more complicated or things are different or that their campaign statements about an issue really don't conform with good policy, the question is, do they have the strength of intellect to figure that out and the strength of character to do something about it? And then do their constituents have the wherewithal to engage with them and understand when they come back, and say that, not call them a flip-flopper, but say, thank you for going and learning that. Now we can be more intelligent out here in Longview or at Fort Sam Houston or, Fort Cavazos or wherever we live. This is very helpful to us, right? And so that's what we're really looking for, and that's what Texas Impact people, I think, can do, is engage during the interim with members and say, hey, we want this to be a fruitful educational experience for everybody, so that we can really, next session, we're really talking a lot more about policy than campaign promises, and that the campaign promises you make in your next election are way more associated with strong public policy.
Any advice on how to start those conversations for an average listener who's listening to this program today who hasn't been hanging out at the Capitol over the 140 days, or even if they visited a couple of times as part of an event? What advice would you have for them as they start to have those conversations with legislators? How do you set them up? What's your messaging, that kind of thing? Yeah,
I mean, I think the first piece of advice I would give in terms of starting those conversations is, for crying out loud, don't start those conversations yet. These guys are exhausted, And they've been up at the Capitol, and no matter what you think of the individuals or some of the policy, it is hard work to be at the Capitol, and there is some real fatigue that sets in. They have to have a minute for some self-care, and so do our people, really. A lot of our people who have really been engaged need to step back and be thoughtful. The first session that I was a real live contract lobbyist, I finished a session, I took Tuesday off, finished on Monday, took Tuesday off, and on Wednesday I started making phone calls. And the people on the other end said, "What are you doing?
Leave me alone. Leave me alone.
Leave me alone. Call me in September." So the first thing I would say to our people is target September as a time to start those fruitful conversations. And there's a reason that September is good. One is it's a good moment of rest for everybody. Two is that a lot of legislators travel in the summer to various conferences and then, of course, their own private travel. And three is the effective date of bills is September 1st. And so there will be a re-energizing of the legislative session as those bills become law and become effective. And that's a good hook for walking into a legislator's office and saying, "Hey, September 1st came and went. This is law now. This is why we think this is a good thing, or this is why we think it's not a good thing, and we'd like to work with you on it over the interim." And so pick those issues that are important to you, watch them in terms of their effective date, and make a plan for a conversation in September with your member going forward into the interim.
Yeah, I think you clarified it there. Legislators get some time off. Beaman and Davey, who are both on the Zoom today, get some time off because they've been working late. Listeners, you don't get a few months off. Take a week or two, do some reflecting, do some processing, go outside and touch some grass, do all the things. But our hope is that over the course of the summer, that you'll be doing the planning work to have those conversations in September. And so our hope is that this summer, you and your friends, you and your congregations, you and your affinity groups start to think about what happened during the legislative session and start to make a plan for what you're going to do moving forward. So you don't get the time off, but I think it's a good reminder to not be blowing up the phones of legislators expecting them to show up and meet with you next week. I think that's a good word. Beaman, you mentioned big issues, and I know there are a lot of issues that Texas Impact talked about over the course of the legislative session. I think we had maybe 100 bills or so that showed up on action alerts throughout the Texas Impact family. We're going to be talking about a lot of those in the wrap-up series, but I wonder if there were a few key moments or a few key bills that you really hope that people will think about and spend some time preparing to meet with legislators about in the coming months.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're doing sort of a comprehensive, because there are a lot of them.
There are a lot.
I can sort of pick my top ones, but that doesn't mean. I mean, the fact is, as we like to say, that bills are little baby laws, and then they grow up and become laws. And laws are serious business. I mean, laws put people in jail. They are the coercive power of the state, and so we passed a lot of bills this legislative session that are going to become law, and so. Yeah, there's plenty. I would, to be true to your question, I would say probably the top couple to look at are, one, obviously the suite in public education, and specifically Senate Bill 2, the voucher bill, and then House Bill 2, the new education funding bill. Those are going to have material impacts on every single district in the state. And every one of your congregations is going to be touched by those bills. And so I would say educate yourself about your school district, educate yourself about the sort of education environment in your community. Watch for a growth of private schools or private school options. Watch for the funding of the Education Savings Account initiative and see if it grows, as some people think that it may grow into this structure beyond the $1 billion that were set aside for it. And so I would say, first and foremost, watch for education and talk to your people, talk to your teachers, talk to your superintendents. There's going to be some new money in your districts, particularly rural districts. And yet there are also going to be a lot of strains on the people who are trying to run and manage those school districts. So keep an eye out on that. See if that funding bill really helps or not, because that's going to be an important question that the legislature needs answered. You sent us money, did it really help? And so I think that the work that we did, particularly in women's healthcare and pregnancy healthcare, is important. There should be a change with Senate Bill 31 in the context of pregnancy care and the availability of care. So put your ear to the ground on that. Find out if your community feels safer or less safe with regard to being pregnant in Texas. Find out whether or not your communities have more or the same or less access to health care for pregnant women. I think that that's really important. And I think watching your communities, there are a whole bunch of people who live in Texas who I tend to think of as Texans, as people, but who are not documented. And those folks are doing work, and they're providing service, and they're enriching the economy of Texas. And we know this to be true. These are objective facts. They are also being accused of being gang members and murderers and rapists. And we passed a raft of bills that changed the fortunes of those fellow people, those people who are traveling with us. And watching your community to see if people are afraid, watching your community to see if people disappear and just evaporate out of the community, watching your community to see if it's running differently because people are going underground or just getting out of Texas. And watching for injustice, watching to see if people are not availing themselves of the protection of the state, of police protection, et cetera, because they're now afraid after this legislative session and thinking about what we can do about that. So I think I kind of think of those three things: the education, the healthcare, and then the status of immigrants in our community as really important things to look for in the next 90 days for sure.
Yeah, I think those are three important keys. And if your issue that you love the most did not make the list, don't worry. We'll be talking about that coming soon. Or you can join one of Texas Impact's teams to talk a lot more about that different issue area. Beaman, there are a lot of people who are leaving this legislative session and moving into the interim, not feeling great about public policy in Texas. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we've got a lot of noise coming out of Washington, D.C. that some folks might love and others might hate. How do we keep focused on, how do we keep the population, how do we keep our friends focused on what happened in Austin as we move into this interim? And what advice do you have for people who might not be feeling so great about what happened over the 140 days?
Well, there's the Pollyanna Beaman and there's the hard guy Beaman. I'll start with the hard guy Beaman. And that is that, if you're complaining that your boat is leaky, do you stop bailing or do you keep bailing? And the fact is, what is the alternative in terms of working, right? You stay with it. You stay at it. You improve the legislature one member and one conversation with one member at a time. And that's the work. And it's pretty hard, and it's long arc, and it can feel a little bit thankless, and you can burn out and take a step back and then come back in refreshed. So I mean, the hard Beaman says, what's your alternative? Get to work. But Pollyanna Beaman, who really exists in here, says we are a constitutional people, and we are people of faith, and there is a lot of untapped good in the political space because it has been temporarily overwhelmed by strident, divisive, pretty mean politics. Our job is to really keep trying to brush that away and get to the essential humanity of the people with whom we're dealing. And be ready to be surprised that they're not monsters. They just have some monstrous ideas that they need to be educated out of. And that's I really believe that we have the potential to turn this thing around. And I really believe that there are some consequences to some of the just brazenly political acts that are going to demonstrate themselves so that the electorate generally and legislators and everybody else are going to be able to say, oh, man, we got to do something different here. And that comes in water and electricity, and I think education is going to create a series of demonstrations in that space where there's going to be some real space to say, okay, let's talk about policy now. And the question is going to be, are we prepared to just step smoothly and seamlessly into that moment? And the way you be prepared for that is by already being in conversation with them and by doing the work and by being there and by saying, yeah, that's what I've been saying, and with love and minimal I told you so. And then be able to sort of step forward constructively. So yeah, I believe that we are. I mean, you've heard me jokingly and not jokingly say, we're going to have a really rough session in 2025. I think that is a solid prediction.
Yeah, nailed that one.
Yeah. I think we're going to have a great session in 2033. But it's going to be the sessions in between are, interesting, where there's a delta and there's a learning and there's faithful engagement in the process that can really yield a result a little bit at a time in the next few years of our political work here in Texas, and our policy work here in Texas. And so, yeah, I mean, I say do it, and it's like super fun, and knowing stuff is always better than not knowing stuff. And so stay engaged, y'all. I mean, I am happy to help, and our lobby team is happy to help, and please stay engaged and tell your friends, get them engaged too.
Knowing stuff is better than not knowing stuff. Also, I want somebody to go make a calendar reminder for like May 2033 so we can test Beaman's hypothesis that 2033 will be a great legislative session. We can either tell them good call or miss the boat on that one. So there's some homework for you all. Beaman, any other you're one of the most optimistic people I know in the policy process, and I love that about you. Where are you finding hope these days?
Yeah, I'm finding hope in the individual conversations with folks. It's again, I've often said the scariest thing in politics and legislative work is the mob. It's a bunch of people who say, "Oh, gee whiz, we're all together," and everybody is kind of nervous about not doing whatever the thing is that we said we were going to do, right? Even if we know it's a bad thing, we can't stop now. We can't not do something. And where I find hope is in the individual conversation. I have often said that I've been at this work now for 35 plus years, and I cannot count even 10. I don't even get to double digits in terms of the true sociopaths that I've known. And I've known thousands of elected officials at this point. They come and go, and I just keep being here, right? And so thousands of elected officials, and, I worked with David Duke, and, I'll count him as a sociopath, and a couple of others that were either narcissistic to the point of sociopathy or straight up sociopaths. But that's a great percentage. That means that the odds are very, very high that no matter who you're talking to, they're actually a pretty decent human being with some ideology that you really don't agree with, or who just haven't really studied hard enough, or who really think they're doing the right thing and are just really doing the wrong thing, whatever, but they're not there to destroy the world. And if you can sort of start with that as a common point of reference, you don't want to destroy the world, and I don't want to destroy the world. We have really different opinions, potentially, about that, but let's start talking about it and figure it out. And I find that I have a lot more conversations that surprise me with how good they are than disappoint me with how terrible they are. But you got to have the conversation to find that out.
Sign up for Texas Impact Premium today to find out who Beaman's list of sociopaths are behind the paywall. I'm just kidding. Hey, I mean, I think you're right. Seeing the legislators who've been there a couple years and remembering where some of them came from on some of these issues and seeing how they've grown over the course of the years is always a nice moment. And so those conversations do pay off, right? And I agree that most people get into this work because they do want to represent their communities and do want to make good public policy. And so that's why, friends, listeners, your conversations over the course of this interim are important.
And there's an important concept you just said there, which is really, really interesting. A lot of people are perfectly, purely confident when they run for office and they say, we're going to go to Austin or we're going to go to Washington, D.C., and we're going to drain the swamp, right? We're going to, those people have lost their way and we're going to go with this sort of purity of purpose and lots of simple solutions and fix everything. And then they come to Austin, and in my opinion, they find out that things are just more complicated than that. They find out that there are unintended consequences to their simple solutions. What was Mark Twain famous for saying, for every complex problem, there's a simple solution that doesn't work. And so then they go back to Huntsville, Texas, and say, well, I didn't do that thing because it was more complicated than that. And people say, oh, you've been infected by Austin. Now you are the swamp. So when you say you observe that there are members who come to Austin and they sort of get more thoughtful, there are a lot of people in the electorate who say they went to Austin and they lost their way. And it's really up to us as educated people in the community that are really looking at policy to defend members when they start to figure out that things are a little bit more complicated and that policy work really requires a lot of balance and a lot of give and take.
And I think Bea said something interesting a couple weeks ago. I think it was on the podcast where she said one of the questions she hopes people will ask their members over the interim is, how did you come to that decision? Like, who are you talking to? What are you thinking about? What questions are you asking to come to your decision on a policy issue? So understanding how they make decisions could help us understand, number one, how to approach them, and number two, maybe if they're a good fit for the legislature. But I thought that was a really interesting question that she was having people ask.
Yeah, and when they're called flip-floppers or corrupt or any other mean political names because they came to Austin and learned something, we need to defend them for learning and say, hey, no, they learned something. They're a better legislator than they were when they went all fresh out of the cannon from the district. And it's incumbent upon us to say, no, they're doing the right thing, not the wrong thing when they go and learn. So, yeah. Good conversation, Beaman. Anything else before we close out today? No, sir. Just enjoyed working with Texas Impact this session, and I'm looking forward to a fruitful interim. I'm also looking forward to a fruitful interim, but I hope you have a chance to get some sleep between now and then. Friends, certainly watch this space over the course of the coming weeks. We're going to have opportunities for you to engage. We're going to have more information on bills that are now laws and bills that died for whatever reason. So watch this space for more information about what happened during the legislature and for how you can get involved over the course of the interim. Beaman, as always, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate the work you do on behalf of Texas Impact and Texas in general. Thanks for all you do. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you as well. See ya. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Beaman. I love that he can stay optimistic about the future even when things don't go well. And I think part of that optimism is because of you. Because of the work you are doing to engage your legislators and your communities. Friends, we definitely have work to do. And the Texas Impact team is excited to do that work with you. I know many of our teams are taking a week or two off to rest, but we look forward to being back with you soon as we begin to prepare for what comes next. And I want to thank you again for listening to this podcast throughout the session, and I look forward to our future programming. If you have ideas or suggestions, please share them. My email is scott@texasimpact.org. If you want to stay updated beyond listening to the podcast, make sure you sign up for all that Texas Impact has to offer at texasimpact.org in the Action Center. Sign up for emails or join one of our issue teams. While you're on the website, I hope you'll take a moment to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact.
Y'all, this is important. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of faith to advocate for more just and equitable Texas. So with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.